Millionaire hires Maid, then discovers she's his long-lost childhood sweetheart. The soft hum of the fountain outside Ethan Montgomery's sprawling estate blended with the faint rustle of leaves in the early morning breeze. Inside the grandiose mansion, the marble floors gleamed under the light streaming through towering windows. Ethan, clad in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, sat at the head of a massive oak dining table, staring blankly at the untouched plate of food before him. Despite the opulence surrounding him, the golden chandeliers, the priceless artwork adorning the walls, there was an undeniable emptiness in his gaze. Wealth and power had come easily to him after years of relentless work, but there was a hollowness in his success, a quiet ache he couldn't seem to ignore. His assistant, Philip, shuffled into the room with his usual brisk efficiency, clutching a stack of documents that required signatures. "Sir, your 10 o'clock meeting has been moved to 11, Philip began, his voice professional but cautious, as if sensing Ethan's mood. "And I've confirmed the new staff member will start today. She's been vetted thoroughly." Ethan barely acknowledged him, nodding absently. "Fine," he said, his voice low and detached. "Make sure she knows her place." Philip hesitated for a moment before leaving the room. Ethan's tone was clipped, but it wasn't anger, just the exhaustion of a man who carried the weight of 1,000 responsibilities and a gnawing sense of discontent. As the door closed behind his assistant, Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the crystal chandelier overhead. He closed his eyes briefly, memories flickering at the edges of his mind. Images of a simpler time, laughter under the shade of a large oak tree, and a girl with bright eyes and a mischievous smile. But as quickly as the memory surfaced, he pushed it away. Far from the grandeur of the Montgomery estate, Anna nervously adjusted the hem of her modest uniform in the back of a cab. Her reflection in the window stared back at her, filled with apprehension. The maid uniform felt strange on her, as though it didn't belong to her. Yet, she couldn't deny the reality of her situation. Bills were piling up, and this job, no matter how intimidating it seemed, was a lifeline. The mansion loomed ahead, its sheer size making her stomach churn. She wasn't used to this world of excess. Her upbringing had been far from luxurious, and even now, after everything she'd endured, stepping into such an opulent space felt surreal. The cab pulled up to the gates, which opened with a mechanical hum. As the car wound its way through the immaculate driveway, Anna's heart raced. She clutched the small bag in her lap, her fingers trembling slightly. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, forcing a deep breath. When the cab stopped in front of the massive front doors, an older woman stepped out to greet her. The woman's sharp features and piercing gaze immediately put Anna on edge. This must be Mrs. Calloway, the house manager Philip had mentioned during the interview process. "Anna, I presume," Mrs. Calloway said curtly, her tone devoid of warmth. "You're late." Anna's cheeks flushed. "I'm sorry. The traffic—" "No excuses," Mrs. Calloway interrupted, motioning for Anna to follow her inside. "We run a tight ship here. Mr. Montgomery expects nothing less than perfection." The interior of the mansion was breathtaking. Anna couldn't help but marvel at the high ceilings, the intricate woodwork, and the sheer elegance of every detail. Yet, beneath the surface, she felt a wave of unease. It wasn't just the grandeur, it was the man who lived here. She'd read about Ethan Montgomery in the papers, heard about his ruthless business acumen and his meteoric rise to wealth. But there was more to it than that. As she stepped deeper into the house, a sense of familiarity gnawed at her. Mrs. Calloway led her to the staff quarters, where Anna's duties were explained in meticulous detail. "You'll be responsible for the East Wing," Mrs. Calloway said, her tone brooking no argument. "And you are to stay out of Mr. Montgomery's way unless absolutely necessary." Anna nodded obediently, though her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't shake the strange feeling that had settled over her since entering the house. Something about this place, about the name Montgomery, stirred a memory she couldn't quite place. Hours later, Anna found herself dusting shelves in the grand library. The room was enormous, lined with towering bookshelves that seemed to stretch to the heavens. As she worked, her fingers brushed against a framed photograph on one of the shelves. She hesitated, her eyes drawn to the image. It was of a young boy standing beside an older man, presumably his father. The boy's face was hauntingly familiar, his bright eyes sparking a long-buried memory. Her breath caught. It couldn't be. A voice broke her reverie. Is there a problem? Anna spun around, nearly dropping the duster. Ethan stood in the doorway, his tall frame backlit by the warm glow of the hallway. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "No, sir," Anna stammered, quickly placing the photograph back on the shelf. "I was just cleaning." Ethan's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary. There was something about her, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. She seemed familiar. But before he could dwell on it, he shook off the thought. "Good," he said curtly. "Carry on." As he turned to leave, Anna exhaled shakily, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe it. Ethan Montgomery, the boy she'd spent countless summers with, laughing and dreaming beneath the old oak tree in their childhood neighborhood. But he didn't recognize her. Or if he did, he gave no indication. That night, as she lay in the small room assigned to her in the staff quarters, Anna's mind raced. She had recognized him instantly, the boy she'd once called her best friend, the boy who had promised they'd always stay in touch. But that promise had been broken long ago when his family had moved away without warning. What was she supposed to do now? Tell him who she was? Pretend not to know him? She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. She had never expected their paths to cross again, let alone under these circumstances. The morning sun crept through the blinds, casting soft streaks of light across Anna's small room. She hadn't slept much, her thoughts consumed by the revelation of the day before. The boy she'd spent countless summers with, the one who shared her dreams of escaping their small neighborhood, was now the man she worked for. It felt surreal, like stepping into a dream she hadn't realized she was still having. She shook her head, forcing herself out of bed. Dwelling on the past wouldn't help her now. She had a job to do, and the last thing she wanted was to give Mrs. Calloway another reason to scold her. She slipped into her uniform, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and made her way toward the east wing. The mansion was silent at this hour, the staff moving like shadows through its vast halls. As Anna reached the library, her first task of the day, she found herself hesitating. Her eyes darted to the photograph she'd seen the day before. It still sat on the shelf, an innocent relic of a past that now felt unbearably close. She couldn't help herself, her fingers reached out, tracing the frame lightly. "What are you doing?" The voice startled her, and she nearly dropped the photograph. Turning quickly, she found Ethan standing in the doorway again, his brows furrowed in confusion. He was dressed casually today, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and his hair slightly mussed, as though he hadn't yet faced the world outside. I was just dusting, sir," Anna stammered, placing the photo back on the shelf. Her heart raced, both from the shock of being caught and the proximity of the man she once knew so well. Ethan stepped into the room, his gaze flickering to the photograph. "You seem particularly interested in that picture," he remarked, his tone neutral but his curiosity piqued. Anna felt her throat tighten. She needed to choose her words carefully. "It's a lovely photo," she said softly, her eyes avoiding his. "You look happy." For a moment, Ethan didn't respond. His gaze lingered on the photograph, a faint shadow crossing his face. "That was a long time ago," he said finally, his voice quieter now. "Things were simpler then." Anna wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the chasm that had formed between them. But how could she? How could she reveal that she was the girl in his past, the one he'd left behind? Instead, she forced a small smile and busied herself with her work. Ethan watched her for a moment longer before turning away, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. The days passed, and Anna found herself growing more accustomed to the rhythm of life in the mansion. Yet, every interaction with Ethan left her heart racing. She noticed the way he carried himself, the subtle shifts in his mood, and the rare moments when his carefully composed exterior cracked, revealing glimpses of the boy she once knew. One evening, as she prepared to leave the dining hall after cleaning up from dinner, she overheard Ethan speaking with Philip in the adjoining study. Their voices were low, but the tension in their conversation was unmistakable. "The charity gala is in 2 weeks," Philip was saying. "You're expected to attend." It's good for the company's image. Ethan let out a weary sigh. Must I? He asked, his tone laced with frustration. These events are all the same. Shallow displays of wealth and power. They mean nothing. Philip hesitated before replying. It's not just about appearances, sir. The gala supports the children's hospital. It's for a good cause. Ethan fell silent, and Anna strained to hear more. She could sense his resistance, his weariness with the world he'd built around himself. It was a side of him she hadn't expected to see, a vulnerability that made her chest ache. Later that night, as Anna lay in bed, her thoughts returned to the boy Ethan had once been. He had always been so full of hope, so determined to make something of himself. But the man she saw now was different. He was guarded, burdened by a life that seemed to offer him everything yet left him wanting more. She couldn't stop herself from wondering, had he ever thought of her? Did he remember the summers they spent dreaming beneath the old oak tree? Or had she been just a fleeting memory, lost in the chaos of his rise to success? The following day, Anna found herself assigned to the garden, a task she welcomed. The fresh air and vibrant flowers provided a welcome escape from the confines of the mansion. She worked quietly, her hands moving rhythmically as she pruned the hedges and swept fallen leaves from the stone paths. It was there, amid the roses and hydrangeas, that Ethan found her. She didn't notice him at first, her focus entirely on the task at hand. But when she glanced up, she saw him standing a few feet away, his hands in his pockets and a curious expression on his face. "You seem to have a talent for this," he said, his voice breaking the quiet. Anna straightened, brushing a stray leaf from her apron. "Thank you, sir," she replied, her tone polite but cautious. Ethan tilted his head slightly, studying her. "You don't seem like most of the staff," he said after a moment. "There's something different about you." Anna's heart skipped a beat. Was he beginning to suspect the truth? She forced a smile, hoping to deflect his attention. "I'm just here to do my job, Mr. Montgomery." He nodded, but the curiosity in his gaze remained. "And you do it well," he said, his voice softening. "But I can't help feeling like I've met you before." Anna's breath caught. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the handle of the broom. She searched for a response, but none came. The weight of his words hung between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Before she could muster the courage to say anything, Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening as he read the message. "I have to go," he said abruptly, turning on his heel and striding back toward the house. Anna watched him leave, her chest tight with the emotions she couldn't name. She had wanted this job to be a fresh start, a way to support herself and move forward. But the past had found her here, in the most unexpected way. And now, she didn't know how to escape it, or if she even wanted to. The days continued to blend into one another, yet each was colored by a growing tension between Anna and Ethan. Their interactions remained professional, but there was an undercurrent that neither could quite ignore. Ethan's curiosity about her grew with every passing day, while Anna struggled to keep her emotions in check. She had spent years wondering if she would ever see him again, and now that he was here, she found herself paralyzed by uncertainty. One evening, as the household settled into its usual quiet, Anna was tasked with cleaning the drawing room. The room was bathed in the soft glow of the fireplace, its flickering light dancing across the elegant furniture and walls adorned with art. As she worked, she noticed a leather-bound journal sitting on the coffee table. It looked worn, the edges of its pages slightly frayed. Unable to resist, she glanced around to make sure she was alone before picking it up. The initials were embossed on the cover. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it to the first page. The handwriting was neat but had a hurried quality, as though the words had been written in moments of intense emotion. Flipping through the pages, she found entries that spoke of loneliness, of longing for something more. But it was a single passage that made her breath catch. "I often wonder about the life I left behind. About the people I left behind. There was a girl once, bright, kind, and fearless. She believed in me when no one else did. I've thought of her more times than I can count, wondering if she remembers me too." Anna's eyes welled with tears. He did remember. After all these years, he hadn't forgotten her. The boy she'd known was still somewhere inside this guarded, distant man. "What are you doing?" The voice startled her, and she spun around to find Ethan standing in the doorway. His expression was a mixture of confusion and irritation, his sharp eyes fixed on the journal in her hands. I was just," Anna's words faltered as she struggled to find an explanation. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she quickly set the journal back on the table. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to pry." Ethan stepped into the room, his gaze never leaving hers. "That's personal," he said, his tone stern but not unkind. "I don't appreciate people going through my things." "I wasn't," Anna began, but her voice broke. She looked away, ashamed of her actions but overwhelmed by the emotions the journal had stirred in her. "I'm sorry." Ethan studied her for a moment, his expression softening as he noticed the tears in her eyes. "It's fine," he said after a pause, his voice quieter now. "Just don't let it happen again." Anna nodded, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She hurried to finish her work and left the room as quickly as she could, her thoughts swirling. She couldn't ignore the words she'd read. He had thought of her, of their shared past. But what did that mean? Could she find the courage to tell him the truth? The following morning, Ethan couldn't shake the memory of Anna's tearful expression. He had been caught off guard by her reaction, and it lingered in his mind like a puzzle he couldn't solve. There was something about her, something that pulled at him in a way he didn't understand. He found himself seeking her out more often, under the guise of casual conversation. He would linger in the library while she dusted the shelves or pause in the garden while she worked among the flowers. Their exchanges were brief, but each one left him feeling a strange sense of familiarity, as though she were a missing piece of a puzzle he hadn't realized was incomplete. One afternoon, as he strolled through the garden, he noticed Anna sitting on a bench near the fountain. She wasn't working this time, just sitting quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She seemed lost in thought, her expression distant. "Taking a break?" he asked, his voice breaking the silence. Anna looked up, startled, and quickly stood. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to." "Relax," Ethan said, raising a hand to stop her. "It's fine. You're allowed to take a moment for yourself." She hesitated before sitting back down, her posture stiff. Ethan sat on the bench beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the fountain filled the space between them, soothing and steady. "You've been working here for a while now," Ethan said finally, his tone casual. "Where are you from?" Anna tensed slightly. She had been dreading this question, knowing it could lead to places she wasn't ready to go. "A small town," she replied vaguely. "Nothing special." Ethan tilted his head, studying her. "What brought you here?" Anna hesitated, her fingers twisting in her lap. "Life has a way of pushing you in unexpected directions," she said quietly. "I needed a fresh start." Her words struck a chord with Ethan, though he didn't understand why. He nodded, his gaze drifting to the fountain. "I know the feeling," he said. "Sometimes, no matter how far you go, you can't escape the past." Anna glanced at him, her heart aching at the weight in his voice. She wanted to tell him everything, that she knew exactly what he meant because his past was her past too. But fear held her back. What if he didn't feel the same way? What if he saw her as just another member of the staff, an intruder in his carefully controlled world? Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of Philip's voice calling for Ethan from the house. Ethan sighed, rising from the bench. "Duty calls," he said, a faint smile on his lips. "Enjoy your break, Anna." She watched him leave, her chest tight with emotions she couldn't name. She knew she couldn't keep the truth from him forever, but she also knew that once it was out, there would be no going back. That evening, as Anna prepared for bed, she stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. She thought of the journal, of the boy Ethan had once been, and the man he had become. She thought of the summers they'd spent together, dreaming of a future that seemed so far away. Finally, she made a decision. She couldn't live in limbo any longer. It was time to tell Ethan the truth, to face whatever came next, even if it terrified her. The next morning, Anna's nerves were frayed as she began her duties. The decision to tell Ethan the truth weighed heavily on her, and the thought of his possible reaction filled her with dread. Would he be angry that she hadn't said anything sooner? Would he even care? She kept herself busy, scrubbing floors and dusting shelves, hoping the repetitive tasks would calm her racing thoughts. By mid-afternoon, she found herself once again in the library, her favorite room in the mansion despite the emotions it stirred. The walls of books provided a sense of comfort, a reminder of the dreams she and Ethan had shared as children. She remembered how they used to sneak into the town library, spending hours lost in stories of adventure and far-off lands. She had just finished dusting the lower shelves when the sound of footsteps made her pause. She turned to see Ethan standing in the doorway, his hands in his pockets and a thoughtful expression on his face. "Do you have a moment?" he asked, his tone gentler than usual. Anna straightened, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Of course, sir." Ethan stepped into the room, his gaze drifting to the shelves before settling on her. "I wanted to apologize," he began. "About last night. I may have overreacted when I saw you with the journal." Anna blinked, caught off guard. "You don't have to apologize, sir. It was my fault. I shouldn't have touched something that wasn't mine." Ethan shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You were curious. I can't blame you for that." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "That journal, it's full of thoughts I've never shared with anyone. I guess it just startled me to see someone else holding it." Anna's heart ached at his words. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the weight he carried. It reminded her of the boy he used to be, the one who had shared his dreams and fears so openly with her. "Sometimes," she said softly, "it helps to share those thoughts with someone else. To let someone in." Ethan studied her for a long moment, as though trying to decipher her words. "Maybe," he said finally. "But trust doesn't come easily to me anymore." Anna wanted to tell him he could trust her, that he always had. But the words caught in her throat. She wasn't ready yet. "Not here, not like this." Ethan seemed to sense her hesitation. "You're different from the others," he said, his voice quiet. "There's something about you, something I can't quite put my finger on." Anna's breath caught. This was it, the moment she had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Philip's voice echoed down the hall, calling for Ethan. Ethan sighed, the moment broken. "I have to go," he said, his tone laced with frustration. "But, thank you, Anna." "For what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "For listening," he said, giving her a small, genuine smile before turning and walking away. Anna watched him leave, her chest tight with emotions she couldn't name. She knew she couldn't put this off any longer. She had to tell him the truth. But how? That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Anna found herself in the garden, pacing nervously. The air was cool, and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze did little to calm her. She had decided to tell Ethan everything, but the thought of confronting him filled her with dread. What if he didn't remember her? What if he dismissed her as just another employee, unworthy of his time? She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear Ethan approaching until he spoke. "Anna?" She turned sharply, startled to find him standing a few feet away. He had shed his usual suit for a more casual outfit, a simple sweater and slacks, that made him look more approachable, almost like the boy she remembered. "I thought I'd find you here," he said, stepping closer. "You've been avoiding me." Anna shook her head quickly. "I haven't." "You have," Ethan interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "And I want to know why." Anna looked away, her hands trembling. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "There's something I need to tell you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan frowned, his curiosity evident. "What is it?" For a moment, Anna couldn't speak. The words she had rehearsed over and over in her mind seemed to evaporate. But then she thought of the boy he used to be, the boy who had trusted her with his dreams and secrets. She owed him the truth. "It's about your past," she began, her voice shaking. "About your past?" Ethan's frown deepened. "Our past?" Anna nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "You knew me once," she said, her voice breaking. "A long time ago. Before all of this." She gestured to the mansion around them. "Before you became who you are now." Ethan stared at her, confusion flickering across his face. I don't understand. Who are you? Anna hesitated, her heart pounding. And then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she said, I'm Anna. Anna Porter. The name hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Ethan's eyes widened, and for a moment, he looked as though he had been struck. He took a step back, his hand running through his hair as he processed her words. Anna, he said slowly as though testing the name. His gaze locked onto hers, and she saw the recognition dawn in his eyes. It's you. It's really you? Anna nodded, tears streaming down her face. It's me, she said, her voice trembling. I never thought I'd see you again. Ethan stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. Why didn't you say anything sooner? He asked, his voice raw with emotion. I was afraid, Anna admitted. I didn't know if you'd remember me, or if you'd even care. Of course I care, Ethan said, his voice rising slightly. He took a step closer, his eyes searching hers. Anna, I've thought about you more times than I can count. I thought I'd lost you forever. Anna sobbed, unable to hold back the emotions that had been building for so long. I thought I'd lost you too, she said, her voice barely audible. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of their shared past and the years of separation pressed down on them, leaving them breathless. Then, slowly, Ethan reached out and took Anna's hand in his. His touch was gentle, yet it carried a depth of emotion that words could not express. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice breaking. For everything. For leaving. For not finding you sooner. Anna shook her head, squeezing his hand. It wasn't your fault, she said. We were just kids. We couldn't control what happened. Ethan nodded, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. But we're here now, he said, his voice steadying. And I'm not letting you go again. The silence between them was heavy but comforting. The connection they'd lost so many years ago had returned, tentative but undeniable. Ethan's grip on Anna's hand was firm, as if he were afraid that letting go would mean losing her all over again. Anna wiped her tears, her voice trembling as she said, I never thought I'd find you again, Ethan. Not like this. Ethan nodded, his expression softening. Neither did I. I spent years thinking about what happened, wondering where you were, but I didn't know where to start. Life just, he paused, searching for the right words. Life got in the way. Anna could understand that all too well. Life had pushed them in different directions, forcing them to navigate hardships alone. But here they were, against all odds, face to face in a way neither could have anticipated. Do you remember the treehouse? Anna asked suddenly, her voice tinged with a hint of the girl she once was. Ethan's eyes lit up, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the mansion, she saw the boy she remembered, the boy who had spent long afternoons with her under the shade of an old oak tree. Of course I remember, he said, his voice carrying a hint of nostalgia. We spent hours up there, planning our great escape. Anna laughed softly, the sound bittersweet. You always said we'd travel the world, remember? That we'd leave the town behind and make something of ourselves? And we did in our own ways, Ethan said, his smile fading slightly. But I never thought I'd leave you behind. Anna looked down, her heart aching at the sadness in his voice. I didn't think you would either, she admitted. When your family moved, I didn't even get to say goodbye. One day you were just gone. Ethan exhaled deeply, his guilt evident. My father's business collapsed almost overnight. We had to leave everything behind. There wasn't time to tell anyone, and I was too young to fight back. He paused, his jaw tightening. But I should have found a way to reach you. I should have written, called, something. I've carried that regret with me every day. Anna reached out, placing her hand over his. You don't have to explain, Ethan. We were just kids. Neither of us could have known what would happen. But I did know, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. I knew you were the most important person in my life, and I let you go. I let everything we had slip away. Anna's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't from sadness. They were from the overwhelming emotions that came with hearing the truth she had waited so long to hear. You didn't let me go, she said softly. We were taken from each other. But we're here now. That has to mean something, doesn't it? Ethan nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. It means everything, he said, his voice firm. It means I have a chance to make things right. They sat together in the garden for what felt like hours, reminiscing about their childhood and sharing stories of the lives they had lived since. Anna told Ethan about the struggles her family faced after his departure, about the sacrifices she had made to support herself. Ethan listened intently, his expression shifting from sorrow to admiration as she spoke. "You've been through so much," he said, his voice filled with genuine respect. "And yet, here you are, stronger than ever." Anna smiled faintly, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I had to be. Life doesn't give you much of a choice." Ethan's expression grew serious. "But it should have been different. If I'd been there, maybe things wouldn't have been so hard for you." "You can't think like that," Anna said gently. "We can't change the past, Ethan. We can only move forward." He nodded slowly, though the guilt in his eyes remained. "Then let's move forward together," he said, his voice steady. "I don't want to lose you again, Anna." Anna's breath caught at his words. She had dreamed of hearing something like this for years, but now that the moment had come, she found herself unsure of what to say. She cared deeply for Ethan. She always had, but their lives were so different now. He was a wealthy, powerful man, and she was just Anna. "Ethan," she began hesitantly, "I'm just a maid. I don't belong in your world." "You're so much more than that," Ethan said, his tone resolute. "You've always been more. And I don't care about the world I live in. It's empty without people who truly matter." Anna looked at him, her heart aching at the sincerity in his voice. She wanted to believe him, to trust that they could find a way to rebuild what they had lost. But doubts lingered, fueled by the fear that their differences would ultimately pull them apart again. "I don't know if it's that simple," she said quietly. "It doesn't have to be simple," Ethan replied. "We'll figure it out together. Just don't walk away from this. Don't walk away from me." Anna's tears flowed freely now, and she couldn't hold back any longer. She reached out and wrapped her arms around him, clinging to him as though letting go would mean losing him all over again. Ethan held her tightly, his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him. For the first time in years, they felt whole. As the evening turned into night, they remained in the garden, talking and laughing like they used to. The weight of the years that had separated them began to lift, replaced by a sense of hope and possibility. They didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time, they felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together. By the time they returned to the mansion, the air between them had shifted. There was a newfound understanding, an unspoken agreement that they would not let the past define their future. But the road ahead would not be easy. Mrs. Calloway, ever the watchful presence, noticed the change in their demeanor and immediately grew suspicious. As Ethan and Anna worked to navigate their relationship, they would face resistance from those who believed their worlds were too different to merge. And yet, neither of them was willing to give up on the connection they had rediscovered. The journey was just beginning. Over the next few days, the dynamic in the mansion shifted. Ethan made no effort to hide his renewed connection with Anna, seeking her out for conversations and moments of quiet companionship. To the other staff members, it was unusual, even suspicious, to see their employer taking such an interest in a maid. But to Ethan and Anna, it felt natural, like picking up a thread that had only temporarily unraveled. Mrs. Calloway, however, was less than pleased. She confronted Anna in the servants' quarters one evening, her sharp tone cutting through the quiet. "Do you think I don't see what's going on?" she said, her arms crossed and her expression stern. "You're getting too close to Mr. Montgomery, and that is not your place. I suggest you remember why you're here." Anna's heart sank, but she held her ground. "I'm not trying to cause trouble, Mrs. Calloway." "Trouble?" Mrs. Calloway scoffed. "You're a distraction. Mr. Montgomery has responsibilities, his reputation, his business. The last thing he needs is someone like you making him forget that." The words stung, but Anna refused to let them break her. She knew her feelings for Ethan were genuine, and she believed his were too. Still, Mrs. Calloway's warning lingered in her mind, feeding the doubts that had already taken root. Later that evening, Ethan found Anna in the library. She was seated by the window, staring out into the darkened garden. He could see the worry etched on her face and immediately knew something was wrong. "Anna," he said softly, taking a seat beside her. What's going on? She hesitated, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. I don't know if this is going to work, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan frowned, his concern evident. What do you mean? This, Anna said, gesturing between them. Your world is so different from mine, Ethan. People are going to judge. They already are. I don't care what people think, Ethan said firmly. I've spent my entire life living up to other people's expectations, and look where it's gotten me, lonely and disconnected from the things that really matter. You're what matters, Anna. Anna's eyes filled with tears. But what if they're right? What if this ends up hurting you? Ethan reached for her hand, his touch steady and reassuring. The only thing that could hurt me is losing you again. I've already made that mistake once, and I'm not making it again. Anna looked at him, her heart aching at the conviction in his voice. She wanted to believe him, to trust that they could overcome the obstacles in their path. But the doubts still lingered, fueled by the fear of the unknown. As if sensing her hesitation, Ethan said, "Come with me." "What?" Anna asked, startled. "Come with me," Ethan repeated, standing and offering his hand. "There's something I want to show you." Anna hesitated for a moment before taking his hand. He led her out of the library and through the mansion, his steps purposeful. They exited through the back door and into the garden, where the night air was cool and filled with the scent of blooming flowers. Ethan led her to a small path that wound through the trees at the edge of the property. The path was lit by soft, glowing lanterns, and it felt as though they were stepping into another world. After a short walk, they reached a clearing where a single, massive oak tree stood tall and proud. Anna gasped, her eyes widening in recognition. "Is this?" "It is," Ethan said, a small smile on his lips. "I had it moved here years ago. When my company started to grow, I bought the land where our neighborhood used to be. The tree was still there, and I couldn't bear to leave it behind. So I brought it here." Anna's eyes filled with tears as she took in the sight of the tree that had been such a central part of their childhood. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the rough bark. Memories flooded back, of laughter, of whispered secrets, of dreams shared beneath its branches. "I thought it was gone," she said, her voice trembling. "I couldn't let it go," Ethan said, his voice soft. "It was the one piece of my past that I couldn't let go of. And now I know why." Anna turned to him, her tears falling freely. "You kept it all these years." "Because it reminded me of you," Ethan said, stepping closer. "Of everything we lost. But now, standing here with you, I don't want it to just be a memory. I want it to be part of our future." Anna's breath caught at his words. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the depth of his feelings. For the first time, the doubts that had plagued her began to fade, replaced by a sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. "Ethan," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm scared." "I know," he said, taking her hands in his. "But we can face this together. Whatever challenges come our way, we'll face them together. I promise." Anna looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of hesitation. But all she saw was love and determination. She nodded, her tears spilling over as she smiled. "Okay," she said softly. "Together." Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as the stars twinkled above them. For the first time in years, they felt whole, like two halves of a puzzle finally reunited. As they stood beneath the oak tree, they knew their journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, battles to fight, and judgments to face. But they also knew that they had something stronger than the obstacles in their path, each other. And for the first time, they truly believed that was enough. The days following their reunion under the oak tree were filled with a renewed sense of purpose for both Ethan and Anna. Yet, the reality of their situation began to creep in. The staff whispered behind closed doors, Mrs. Calloway's disapproving stares grew sharper, and Ethan's business obligations loomed heavier than ever. For all their newfound happiness, it was clear that the world around them would not accept their relationship without a fight. One evening, as the sun set in hues of orange and purple over the sprawling estate, Ethan called Anna to the study. She arrived to find him seated by the fireplace, a thoughtful expression on his face as he stared into the flickering flames. On the table beside him was a small velvet-covered box. Anna's heart skipped a beat. "You wanted to see me?" Ethan turned, his expression softening when he saw her. He motioned for her to sit in the chair opposite him. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "About everything that's happened since you walked into this house." Anna nodded, unsure of where he was going but sensing the weight of his words. She clasped her hands in her lap, waiting for him to continue. "I've spent my whole life chasing success," Ethan said, his gaze meeting hers. "Building an empire, proving to myself and to the world that I could rise above where I came from. But in all that time, I lost sight of what really mattered. I let go of the people who made me who I am. I let go of you." "Ethan," Anna started, but he held up a hand to stop her. "Let me finish," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "When I saw you again, it was like a part of me that had been missing was suddenly whole. And I realized that all the money, all the success in the world, means nothing without the people you care about. Without you." Anna felt tears welling in her eyes. She wanted to tell him how much his words meant to her, but she couldn't find her voice. Ethan reached for the velvet box, opening it to reveal a simple but elegant gold necklace with a small oak leaf charm. "This isn't much," he said, his voice quieter now. "But it's a symbol of everything we've been through, of where we started and how far we've come. And of my promise to you, that no matter what happens, I'll always choose us." Anna's tears spilled over as Ethan stood and walked to her, the necklace in hand. He gently fastened it around her neck, his fingers brushing against her skin. The charm rested just above her heart, a tangible reminder of their bond. "It's beautiful," Anna whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank you." Ethan knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Anna, I know this won't be easy. People will talk. They'll judge. But I don't care. I've spent too much of my life worrying about what other people think. All I care about is you." Anna looked at him, her heart full of emotions she couldn't put into words. She nodded, a tearful smile breaking across her face. "I don't care either," she said. "As long as we're together, we can face anything." Ethan smiled, his relief evident. He stood, pulling her into a warm embrace. They stayed like that for a long moment, finding comfort in each other's arms. But their challenges were far from over. The next morning, Ethan called a meeting with Mrs. Calloway and the senior staff. Anna stood at his side, her heart pounding as they entered the grand dining room where the staff had gathered. Whispers filled the room as the other employees noticed Anna's presence, but they quickly fell silent when Ethan spoke. "I've asked you all here because there's something I need to address," Ethan said, his tone commanding but calm. "Anna is not just another member of the staff. She is someone I care about deeply, and I will not tolerate any disrespect toward her." The room fell deathly silent. Mrs. Calloway's lips tightened into a thin line, but she said nothing. "I understand that this may come as a surprise to some of you," Ethan continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "But I've made my decision. Anna is a part of my life, and that's not going to change." The staff exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to speak. Ethan's reputation as a firm but fair employer preceded him, and they knew better than to challenge his authority. After the meeting, Mrs. Calloway approached Ethan in private. Her expression was stern, but there was a hint of resignation in her eyes. "Mr. Montgomery, if I may speak freely?" "Of course," Ethan said, folding his arms. "I've been with this household for a long time," Mrs. Calloway began. "And I've seen many things. But this is unprecedented. You're putting yourself and her at risk. People will talk. They'll question your judgment. Your business partners may not approve." Ethan nodded, his expression calm but resolute. "I understand your concerns, Mrs. Calloway. But my decision is final. Anna is worth whatever challenges come our way." Mrs. Calloway sighed, her disapproval evident. But she nodded reluctantly. "Very well, sir. I hope, for both your sakes, that this works out." In the weeks that followed, Ethan and Anna faced their share of challenges. Rumors spread among the staff, and whispers of their relationship even reached the business world. Ethan's board of directors expressed concern about the potential impact on his company's image, But Ethan stood firm. For the first time in his life, he wasn't willing to compromise his happiness for the sake of appearances. Anna, too, faced her own struggles. She felt the weight of the staff's judgment and the pressure of living up to Ethan's world. But every time she felt overwhelmed, Ethan was there to remind her that she wasn't alone. One evening, as they sat together under the oak tree, Anna looked at Ethan and said, "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing?" Ethan smiled, taking her hand in his. "I don't wonder," he said. "I know. You've given me something I never thought I'd find again, hope. And I'm not letting that go." Anna leaned into him, her heart full of gratitude and love. For all the obstacles they faced, she knew they were stronger together. The oak tree, with its deep roots and towering branches, stood as a testament to their resilience, a symbol of their past and a promise for their future. As the stars twinkled above them, Ethan and Anna knew that their journey was just beginning. But they were ready to face whatever came their way, hand in hand, united by the bond they had rediscovered. And for the first time in years, they felt truly at peace.